Okay, let's get into this session. We'll do a quick welcome, we'll do a background, we'll introduce our scenarios and have a panel discussion, then work out how we can have an impact and move forward. I'm Keith Sheringham. Some of you I have met before. A copy of my profile is in the slide deck, and our other host today is Tom Cleary. His profile is there, and he is part of the panelists. We have three other panelists, which we will introduce shortly: Shana Daly, Vlados Leonas, and Soren. We'll introduce them for the panel discussion. Now, basically, we'll do the quick introductory bits and that sort of thing, have a discussion for about 20, 25 minutes, change the scenario, extend the panel discussion. Now, it may end up that it's like 30-10 rather than what we've got there. Let's see how we go. But we do encourage you to get involved and to contribute. Now, the idea of this session came about a year ago. We did one about a whole of business response to cybersecurity. And from that came the feedback to have more extended sessions about the business management of cybersecurity and responding to it, because there's many avenues for the technical side. This one is more of the business side, and we want to look at aspects around AI and those sorts of things. Now, we did one in March about protecting for a denial of system, and we did payroll. We looked at how the business impacts if we lost data, and we looked at contacts and contact databases. This one today is how we respond to a theft of data. And our last one in October is about getting people skilled up, the HR considerations and those sort of things. Now, before we move on, is there anybody in the audience from the Australian Bureau of Statistics? Would you raise your hand in the chat? If not, I've just been asked to remind you by a friend that works there that it is Census Day. Please fill in your censuses as soon as you can, and if not, during this evening. So, and yes, they wanted to get me to emphasize cybersecurity has been a key issue in their preparations for the census. Now, you've got two slide decks. One is a copy of this presentation, and there's an editable PowerPoint of self-help notes. The self-help notes have all the questions from the conversation today. We encourage you to fill them in and use them in the session, but also you can take it back to your organizations and work with your stakeholders to help them with some of the conversations that we are having. Right. As we mentioned, our session today is about responding to theft of data. Now, theft of data can include just the copying and leaving the original data behind. It can be an actual theft of data where they take the data with them, or they could just copy it and deny you access to the data. We're not breaking down these three different scenarios, we're lumping them all together, but please bear in mind the devious minds of some of the cyber criminals. So let's do a bit of background. If you've seen these couple of slides before, that's great, please bear with me. So, we have 1.5 tons of heroin seized at the port of Rotterdam about 2 or 3 years ago. This is probably one of the biggest seizures of heroin that we've had. Now, 33 tons of heroin is about $14.5 billion, roughly speaking. So you can see the 1.5 tons to the 33 tons. Now, on the right-hand side is a loaded 60-ton dump truck. The value of cybercrime in Australia is 29 billion. So that dump truck full of heroin is what we're talking about. And obviously there's a lot of social impacts and other things beyond it, but I just want to paint a picture so that we understand what we're doing and where it sits in the context. I gave this talk to the US about a month ago. Their cybercrime is about 1.3 trillion US per year, and it's about 220, 230 dump trucks full of heroin moving around. Okay, park AI for a minute. As long as we're putting in more servers, using more data, using more electronic services, we are increasing vulnerability for cyber attacks and increasing demand for cybersecurity skills and expertise. AI is only adding to that. More attacks occurring faster, higher frequency, increased complexity. So I'll give you an example. The hackers now take down the backup system first, and then they attack the main systems. Because if I'm being blackmailed, I'll just say, fine, I'm just going to go ahead and recover from my backup. AI allows them to do these more sophisticated attacks. One of the things with AI is the use of AI agents and those sorts of things. We're seeing a greater use of AI agents, a greater proliferation of shadow technology with increased vulnerabilities around cyber security. I did a piece of work with the NT government previously, and they're actually moving away from bring your own device to agency-issued specific laptops and mobile phones so that AI agents cannot just proliferate on the systems because of the cybersecurity attacks. Now, one last one before we move on. With all the hype you hear about AI, all the job threats and that sort of thing, park the hype. Especially in AI and cybersecurity, the human factor is more important than ever before. The need for more people in more roles with more cybersecurity expertise is increasing. And even things like the Mythos attacks, you can't just have AI write all the code and fix it, because you've got a whole series of business dependencies, systems dependencies to fix if Mythos is exposing you to cyber vulnerability. So our attacks are across the entire logistics chain. And we've seen with the Qantas examples, they've been as strong or as weak as one of their channel partners. It's loss of system, denial of access to data, and theft of data. This is what all the cyber crimes are basically about. Now, we have talked momentarily about the proliferation of AI agents and shadow technology. There's a link on the slides where these guys hacked McKinsey's and all their AI agents and caused massive chaos and disruption. One of the features with AI is this proliferation of shadow technologies. And as professionals in cybersecurity, we're faced with managing that and responding to it. Now, one of the challenges is we're integrating AI into our business operations. We need to know what AI is used where, by who, to deliver what. If we don't have the audit regimes, the assurance regimes, and we're not getting a basic grasp on this, we do increase our vulnerabilities. We need to know how AI is being used to deliver what. We need to manage all of this on a risk-based approach. We need to make sure our vendors, our partners, and our dependencies are understood. People need to be skilled and trained, and revisions to controls and governance and reporting need to go around it. Yes, there's this whole area, cybersecurity audit and AI audit, but there's still this basic business need to do it. And we do it because it's an insurance for our businesses, it's how we retain customers, and it's how we protect our businesses. A couple more slides and then we'll pause. One of the emerging areas within AI is the automation of process and how do we make decisions. If we're automating decision making, whether it's loan approvals or whatever it is, there are decisions that should never be made by AI. There are decisions that should be made by AI to go into the next process, and there are decisions that should be returned to humans for intervention and management. The automation of decision making is an increased area of cyber vulnerability and an increased area of exploitation. And the recent one where the AI has escaped its boundaries, where AI has deleted both production systems and backup databases at the same time. That's the example of where those decisions should never have gotten into AI. So part of our growing needs around AI is this management of decisions and the impacts upon cybersecurity, which is where we're talking about this whole of business response. Now, I'll leave this slide with you to look at your leisure. What AI does is it intensifies gaps in existing processes. It intensifies the need for error management and response at scale, and there's a drive for the greater intervention of the human factor to prevent, prepare, and respond. Okay, let's get into our scenario session and our panel discussion. Now, first of all, what we'll do is we'll talk about a couple of real-world examples about theft of data, introduce the panel, introduce the scenario, talk about it, use the self-help notes to guide you through the sessions, extend the scenario, have the panel discussion, and come back. At this stage, I'd like to pass across to Tom to walk us through the next couple of slides. Tom, are you all good to go?
Yep, absolutely.
Right, over to you, please.
So this one talks about the Office of Personnel Management, who are a department of the US government. They held data on all of the people that were employed by government, including spies. So when they got hacked because they did something really stupid and let everybody in, their agents suddenly started dying, particularly the undercovers in China. Like that. You kind of go, so why did you allow people with names like Steve, whether his face is the Captain America character and Iron Man character into your systems? Why did nobody notice? And I think the answer comes down to the fact that didn't think we were going to get hacked. Nobody really notices us. Now, OPM are probably the classic example of what not to do, but that doesn't really endear them to Australians. Australians are the next target. So Keith, you can go to the next slide. Medibank. Everybody remember them? So Medibank are, people who control records on behalf of a significant fraction of the population of Australia. They hold sensitive data because actually you're going to tell the people at Medibank that you've got some serious disease or another, and they lost all their stuff. So they started doing things like identity repair and everybody using ID care and credit repair and whatever, but they haven't actually been charged yet, or they haven't been convicted. But they're probably going to follow the legislation which has been upgraded since the FIIG thing, which ASIC have blown their trumpet about recently, where FIIG didn't do any cyber for years, and so they made it a board level issue and they got a $2.5 million fine. So Keith, could you go to the next one, please? We could add lots and lots and lots of people to the list. These are just an example of the few that we've heard about. In fact, there are several different organizations who use the dark web to fence stuff and to use it as a means of coercing changes to legislation. So ransomware, although it's successful, doesn't really cover it because actually if you're looking at the GP network, is that commercial or government? It's kind of both. Again, this is the government side of the house, but it's not the worst. Go to the next one. So recently we had the nation's largest power company data breach. The origin have lost lots and lots of details for people who they probably shouldn't have. But when you look at it, it's again because of the board ignoring basic cyber hygiene. And when you look at the, it wasn't me, it was the dog kind of scenario. It's software as a service that allows third parties in. Now, that means effectively that the economics of the situation, you buy the lowest prices and you're going to be using somebody who's maybe links to China, who potentially is going to be torpedoing your system. That is, you haven't let North Koreans in to work for you in the first place. They end up taking their data and selling it to somebody else. This one is going to run because actually it's the government probably having to have a go at these source providers for ignoring cybersecurity. Then they're not the worst. Very sure the worst is probably still yet to happen because AI is being a patch of getting on us. Please, can you take it to the next one?
Right. Thank you, Tom. So from those, what we see is that theft of data is across agencies of all types, sizes, sectors, that sort of thing. And especially the Origin Energy one, we see that need for a whole of business response has become more and more critical as more and more details have come out. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce our panelists, and then we'll introduce the scenario, and let's get into the questions and the discussion. So Shana, if you don't mind, ladies first, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Keith. Hi, I'm Shanna Daly. I've been working in cybersecurity since about 2001 and for the better part of the last 15 years in incident response and digital forensics. So still actively working in incident response these days, but also working with organizations on SOC processes, security operations and things like that. So still very much across how these data breaches are happening and what are the things that people need to think about to put in place in order to help prevent them or at least detect, in a nutshell.
Thank you. Our second panelist is a famed author on the New York Times bookseller list. So Vlados, please.
Thank you, Keith. I'm a career chief information officer and consultant with a very strong interest in cybersecurity. My interest is so strong that I have published, two of my books have been published. This is the second one that came out in April. It is a cybersecurity guide for directors and CEOs. At some point, I've acted as New South Wales government CISO for a while. So I'm looking forward to the discussion.
And Soren?
Hi, my name is Soren. Look, I've most recent post was Chief Information Security Officer for New South Wales Electoral Commission. I'm been a technologist since the early 80s when I told people that I wrote my first password sniffing program in 1987, I think, or 88, somewhere around then. It sort of gives you an idea. Security has always been an important factor for me, even before it became famous and it started to come into real consciousness.
And our final panelist is Tom. Tom, would you do a quick hello?
Hi folks, I'm Tom Cleary. I've been doing IT since about the time that Soren was writing his first password category. Been working as a police officer first 9 years out of uni. Switched to IT back in 1990. So I've been in IT full time since then. Involved in several interesting things.
Thank you. So to everybody on the session, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat. Please feel free to use the other slide deck as a guide as we go through. Please feel free to make your own notes. Kelsey, can you please act as a second timekeeper and keep me honest as we go through the discussion? So the scenario is this: we're responding to a theft of data. We're working for a mid-tier agency within federal government, but as you've seen, a lot of things we're going to talk about are common, whether you're in a larger agency, state government, or within different size companies. And we have offices in one or more in all Australian states and territories. There's been a data breach in the organisation, and it is known that bank account details of customers have been taken. I repeat that. We know that bank account details of customers have been taken. It's basic customer contact details. The extent, the cause, what's quite been stolen, the validity of data, and all of that is still to be determined. For the bulk of this conversation, please put yourself in a customer-facing role with team members who may be working with you and looking for you for guidance and support. Now, you are starting to hear things informally about this event, theft of data, and many aspects are unclear. So let's go to our panelists. And let's start with, given that it's bank account details and relatively common semi-public information like your name, your address, your email, phone number, that sort of thing, do you think this is a small financial risk to your organisation and customers? Shana, would you like to weigh in on that one?
Well, given even if it's just a small amount of data and things that you're calling common, it's still considered privacy information under the Privacy Act. So we definitely need to be looking at what the obligations are for the organisation in terms of reporting and how quickly we needed to report, and definitely determining the scope of what information that we know at this point in time has been exposed.
Yeah. Soren, throw to you, given that there's no credit card details, and given it's Australia and you can't take money out of a bank with just a name and banking details. Do you see this as a small risk, or do you still think it's a bigger risk?
I don't see this as a small risk, and the problem is with the framing. So the framing is really the trap, because it's a temptation to say, "Oh, it's only bank details and publicly available information." That's how you can talk yourself into disaster, because we've got to remember that direct fraud risk may be modest, but the stolen data can be combined, blended, it can be derived. Once you add the bank details with contact details, you can come up with highly convincing AI-generated phishing. And that can happen at scale against the customers who will blame you, the organization. The risk isn't what the attacker does with the data. The risk is that the data enables attacks against the customers over the next 5 years. I've been very careful, for example, with my information. One of the very few times that I've actually been hacked was when LinkedIn was hacked, and I'm still getting hacked or attempted today because I have a public profile using data from LinkedIn. So that's my thought on it. Thank you.
Yeah, Vlados, in your conversations with senior management and executives and boards that you've worked with, the conversation that Soren has just raised, what's been your experience in talking to boards about that?
Well, probably I'll start with the importance of notification, because in New South Wales there is a mandatory data breach notification that needs to happen. But the boards typically go into a panic mode in this situation, and majority of them, unfortunately, or a lot of them, not necessarily majority, but a lot of them do not have an action plan for this type of events. And if you aren't prepared, you act kind of in a hectic way. So they definitely should be at the board level and at the CEO and senior executive level, an action plan that includes media management, customer notification, a reaction to inquiries, whether they're coming from individuals or from the media, and cyber response. So it's really about preparing for this event. Unfortunately, in today's world, any organization, be it small or big, can become a victim of a similar event.
Good. And Tom, just before I move to you and the paying a ransom, Soren, you mentioned the fact that the data can be sold on the dark web, blended, and those sorts of things. Would any of the panelists like to talk about that a little bit further and the risk that poses to the business?
Sure, happy to. In my book, You Never Pay Ransom. Because if I remember correctly, roughly 80% of the cases when the ransom has been paid and promises not to sell the data on the dark web, it resurfaces on the dark web sooner or later. So in my opinion, you never pay a ransom. It has been stolen from you, and you have no control of what happens next. And can you trust the thief? Probably not. So that's my view on paying the ransom.
Yeah. So as we moved on to the ransom, Tom, would you, in the position that you're in and the advisory that you're doing with your executives, would you pay a ransom?
I would advise everybody not to pay ransom. Not only does it encourage the ankle biters to come back and have another go, but it doesn't work. A lot of companies kind of go, "We're offline, my God, we're losing money hand over fist, but we need to pay a ransom immediately." And some of our recent hacks have suddenly maturity level of infinite whatever. Have in fact paid ransoms because they want to decrypt their information. It's becoming less popular these days, particularly with AI, because AI doesn't really have a conscience as such. It's just going to do what it's programmed to do. it's been asked to do, or more than what it's been asked to do, but we won't go there. But when you start looking at it, it's something that people knee-jerk reaction want to do because they see that as a simple way out of trouble. Trouble is that most of the customers don't really think that way. I think that's the problem.
Soren, I think you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
Look, there's important to remember, and I think both my previous panelists, fellow panelists have mentioned it. What is it that you're buying when you're paying ransom? A ransom payment is buying you nothing but a criminal's assurance of deletion, which is unverifiable, it's worthless. In other words, you're buying the word of a criminal who's already done a lot of damage. And the funny part is, even when I remind people of that, and I've been in instances where I was advising some organizations that had actually experienced a data breach, they went and paid the ransom anyway. And then guess what happened? They didn't get their data back, and a bigger ransom request came in, and then a bigger ransom request came in. So you really have to have an honest conversation with boards to say, look, you've got to stop the emotion because you can't make it stop. You're in this situation now. There is no easy way out. And what do you actually receive, and what legal obligations do you have? Because a ransom payment in some locations may not actually be legal. So you're opening yourself up to much more pain and hurt.
Yep. Thank you for that. There's a question from Paul. Paul, would you like to come off mute and ask the panelist your question, please?
Yeah, it was around, you were mentioning board responses. Are they more around, the early responses, are they more around company protection, so butt covering, or is it early protection of customers?
Paul, I think that's an excellent question. Shana, would you like to take that one? Or do you want to leave that one to me?
No, that's okay, because actually I think it's interesting that we might think that it's butt covering, but when you think about it, that's the responsibility of the board, is to protect that organisation, and part of protecting that organisation is the protection of their customers as well. So I think especially when something like this happens, their first reaction is going to be specifically about what do we need to do to make sure that we can stay in business. That's kind of the role of that. And as part of that, it's going to be how we make sure that we keep the trust of our customers or our users. And that trust is the bit that makes a difference in an incident when it comes to, do your customers go somewhere else or do they stick with you? So I don't think it's necessarily that they're trying to cover their butts, but I think it's just a natural progression of how do we respond to this and make sure that the organisation is doing what it needs to do, and as part of that, that the customers are actually being protected.
Paul, is that good for you?
Yes, thank you.
Good, because I'd like to move on to the third one, and it relates to the first two questions. So just because it's bank account details, is it of low risk and paying a ransom? Who needs to be involved in these decisions, and who would actually make this decision? Vlados, would you like to share some experience around that, please?
Sure. In my opinion, the decision is a CEO decision. But it cannot be a sole decision made by the CEO. Definitely, there have to be legal consultation, media consultation, and cybersecurity guys consultation. And the board needs to know this is a serious matter, and CEO shouldn't be making a decision without informing the board. So that's the way I see how it works.
Yeah. Soren, do you want to add anything to that?
I completely agree with Vladas. And look, this should be clear in the actual incident response policy, so that when this sort of thing happens, You don't have time to make it up as you go along. You need to be very specific. You need to have the scenarios that have been done in advance so that it's clearly understood. The other thing that I would point out is that in this kind of an environment, when something like this happens, organizations are operating in an environment where there's lots of ambiguity, as the scenario states. The information is not there. You're hearing things informally, so there's lots of vagueness, confusion, and so you're operating under a lot of fog, and that actually trips a lot of organizations. So that's why we professionals say practice the scenarios and know what you're doing and know what your policy is.
Thank you. Vlados?
The other thing that may need to happen, depending upon the nature of the organization, the scale of the organization, the potential breach impact, is people may need to contact ACSC and ASD. If it is Optus or Medibank, they should go to ACSC and ASD ASAP. It's a matter of national security, actually.
Tom, just to leverage on that one, who else would you see getting involved in these decisions?
That's a damn good question, because it depends very much on the nature of the organisation, the nature of the attack. If you've got customer details leaked, as we have in this case, we'd probably be looking at ID care for the national partnership and making sure that people can recover properly. But the cyber departments of the banks, whoever, certainly when we first had the legislation enacted for the mandatory breach scheme, which is called the NDB for some reason, there was a mob called Page Up people who were the first to cab off the rank. They got done through AD from the UK, and 50% of the people in the room were kind of customers and worried about what their reputation was going to look like in the morning. The other half were going, hey, well, you reported it. Excellent. Good work. Now, whether that's the right thing or not, that's what you get. Technicians tend to worry about whether it's replicable. Businesses worry about whether we're going to survive. That's probably as it should be. Particularly in the days of AI, where the apocalypse again, whatever you choose to call it, is upon us. It's been ACSC and ASD and ASIC and APRA and everybody saying this is now officially a board level issue. And boards have been missing in action, frankly, because it's taken them too long to respond.
Yeah, so Shana, coming back to you, please follow on that thread, and could you talk about the business impacts of such a decision? So whether we make a call as business to say it's low risk, it's just bank details, it's not credit cards, we're not really fussed, or to make a decision around a ransom or not, can you talk about some of the sort of business impacts that you've worked with other stakeholders?
Yeah, and it's very interesting because, for example, if we go out there and say, and it happens all of the time, if we go out there and, at some point there will need to be external communications. In these instances, as part of incident response, you'll have your internal and external stakeholders. They may be your customers, and the minute that you go out to your customers and you say to them, oh, look, we've had a breach, but don't worry, it's just these few details, there will be a lot of backlash if your customers think that information that's out there on them is going to cause them harm. And that's, what that impact needs to look like. It's not what is the impact to the business itself by losing this information. If it's customer data, it's what is the impact to the actual individual. So we've seen a lot of businesses come out and say, oh, it's nothing. And the backlash from the public, which means that you get that loss of trust with you and your customers. So in that way, when you're looking at, so if you're looking at health insurance, there's probably a few that you might go, maybe go somewhere else. If you're looking at a telco, people lose trust if your communications and the way that you handle an incident are not in a way that they feel like my data is being protected and that organization actually cares about what has happened. In terms of business impacts of paying the ransom, I've seen many organizations that pay the ransom. However, the data is still out there. Once that data is out in the dark web or out there with someone, it's out of your control and you will never be able to get that back. It's different if, your bike gets stolen and you pay them to get your bike back and you've got your bike, right? That is such a different, you have a physical item. When it's data, it's not physical. So if you pay that ransom, and particularly if an organization thinks that they can pay the ransom and then not disclose this kind of incident, and I have been privy to those kind of organizations before as well that don't want to actually go out there and tell anyone. They will just pay the ransom and hopefully it'll all go away. That also usually backfires because generally that information will still get out on the dark web at some point in time too. So there are long-term business impacts that can happen depending on the decisions that are made, but also the way that those decisions are communicated is really, really important.
Thank you for that. We've got some questions coming up on the communication. Before we move on to the next set of questions, is there any questions from the participants? Please enter any questions you have, any comments into the chat. And Tom, just to wrap up this conversation, what's the one key message people should take out from this part of the conversation?
I think probably the most important thing to take out of it is that, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So basically, if you don't do cyber hygiene and incident response and decide how you're going to tackle it, and that's from the top down, you're going to end up with something which doesn't work in practice. This is coming at you.
Thank you, Tom, because that affirms the gist of these sessions. We've talked about how you prepare. We've talked about impacts. We're talking about responding, and we will do one on HR and people management and that sort of thing. But the theme coming across is it's not just the technical expertise, it's all the other business areas that are impacted and the whole of business response. Shana, go for it, please.
I heard a really great saying earlier this year at OzCert, and it was basically that a breach is inevitable. What happens after is not. So it's that preparation and that being able to respond, expect that it's going to happen. How you respond to it is ultimately what counts.
Yeah. Shana, can you type that into the chat? And Kelsey, can you capture that log line for one of our future sessions? And please give Shana full IP copyright and that sort of thing. Thank you. Let's move on to the next slide and the next part of the conversation. Shana's started to mention this one, so we'll carry on with Shana. Would you be in contact with the media or wait to be contacted by the media? And then I want to go to Tom because this relates specifically to the Origin Energy, but even government agencies impacted by the media. So Shana, you open this can of worms. Can you please scoop them all back into the can?
Yeah, and that's actually interesting, and it's interesting to talk about Origin in this instance because they said, well, we don't know if we've had a breach, maybe, and then obviously the attacker goes to the media and the media comes back to Origin and they say, oh, well, yeah, we've been kind of looking at something since the beginning of the month. So it kind of makes them look like they've got a bit of egg on their face. However, I don't think, if it's my organization, I'm not necessarily going to go to the media, but I would be talking with my comms people, PR people, or, and I keep forgetting to mention, but, a lot of these instances we're going to be dealing with cyber insurance as well. Pretty much most incidents that I work on these days has some kind of cyber insurance involved. And so we need to consider, what is appropriate to do under your insurance policy. But often those insurance companies can, hook you up if you don't have PR and then talk about, are we going to put out a media release? So not necessarily going to the media, but putting out that media release, or communicating with your stakeholders and your customers, partners. I think that's probably more important than going to the media, because where it affects the organization is when the media is the first one to bring it to the attention of the customers. If I've been contacted already and I know what's happening and they've been clear with their messaging, and then I see it on the news, I'm less likely to get angry if I see it on the news and then all of a sudden I'm getting an email sent. It makes the organisation look like they've just been trying to make it go away.
Thank you for that. I want to come back to Tom, and then we've got a couple of comments in the chat that we'll come back to. Tom, the Origin Energy one, there was all sorts of funny media stories about they were approached by the media, they did nothing for a period of time. From a high-profile agency such as the police, what's been your experience around this media engagement?
I think it's a variable feast. It depends very much on the degree of embarrassment that people find themselves in. Certainly, if you're being honest and you're going to stick to the law, you've probably got 72 hours to do something to report it to national. But that depends on which state you're in. Because in this state, the guidance is that you should follow the digital government policy, which is to inform the DGov guys who can then act on your behalf should it become something which is likely to spread or not. In my experience, people like, say, they may be looking at the Origin Energy thing and learning lessons from it. Hopefully they are, because actually they are different kettle of fish because they trust people when they lost millions of dollars that way, but that's a different issue. Certainly from the perspective of making sure that you've got somebody who's prepared to talk to the media at their scale, their timing is important, because actually saying nothing is a trick, something that you get good at with experience. But at the same time, you're buying time for your technical people to do something useful. And that seems to be a bit of a problem for organisations who haven't anybody. That's a different issue.
Thanks, Tom.
Again.
We'll come back to the other panelists in a moment. Sheila Andrews, would you like to come off mute and ask your question or comment, please?
Oh, hi. Yeah, no, I was just going to say from somebody who's worked in marketing and communications for a long time, it really is important, critically important to have marketing and communications or somebody who is experienced in the media and issues management involved as soon as possible, because the decisions that you make early in terms of what you communicate and when you communicate it, just as Shana has said, are critically important. And trust takes a really long time to build, but it doesn't take very long at all for it to be blown to smithereens. So I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
That's a good one, because that's going to lead into our next question in a moment, and that'll be with Vlados and Soren. Paul, you made another comment about Oracle. Would you like to talk to that, please?
That was more just an example of a company obviously sort of denying it, as opposed to we've seen the reports, we're looking into it, we'll respond when we know more, rather than just saying, no, oh, actually, maybe we did. Yes, actually we did. Again, it sort of doesn't build that trust.
Yeah. And Leah, if I'm pronouncing you right, you've got a lovely question. Would you like to join in, please?
All right. Sorry. Hi. Yes, so my question was, excuse my naiveness, with the timeline, I believe there's a timeline for official reporting of incidents. Does this include media considerations?
Would any of the panelists like to put their hand up and take that one? Please remember, you're not a lawyer, and the advice that you've given is not going to be used in court cases and criminal prosecutions and things like that. Soren, thank you for putting your hand up. Please go for it.
All right. So look, most organizations don't actually have this, but if an organization is well prepared, typically they have something called a major incident response team, which covers much more than technology. It could cover earthquakes, it could cover pandemics. There are, organizations, companies, federal department, government departments who are impacted by all these things. And by default, they have public relations and media part of that team. They have defined positions from the executive. And so technology and cybersecurity are not necessarily in control of that, because let's be honest, us technologists are not the greatest communicators. So it's difficult to engage with customers and to make sure that we say the right things. It is a key part. Media and public relations strategy is a key part in managing, because you're dealing with reputational damage. So that reputational damage can kill organizations. In fact, I can give you examples of banks in the US who've gone bankrupt as a result of it within a matter of months. Of such an incident taking place. And so, yes, media and public relations are really important. You don't want to find out from the news, but we're still finding out from the news. Most times companies are reluctant because of legal reasons, because of a variety of reasons. They're reluctant to get on the front foot because they don't think there is a benefit. And that's just the reality of it. That may change with time.
Vlados, please.
I want to link the first plaque on this slide with earlier Paul's question that I think we have missed about whether the boards will protect the company or the customers. We need to remember that the boards are interested in shareholders. So their protection is protection for the company in the first place, and only through this lens they may protect the customers if they see this beneficial for the company. In terms of media, or going to the media, this is what will drive organizations' response. Timing, as Shana said, is extremely important. But the actual media release should be part of the response plan. It should be sitting there as a template where you just fill the dates and what and when happened. So you don't need to invent anything. It has been well thought through, run through legal. Your comms team has approved it, and it is easy to go with this. In my opinion, if media release comes after the information already started to circulate on social media or in printed media, it shows that the organization is not in control, and it's bad for the organization. So finding the timing of putting out media release is extremely important, in my opinion.
Thank you, Vlados. Let's move on to the second question, and that does tie back to the comments from Leah, Paul, and Sheila. How would you respond to stories about what's going on social media? Because we know how fast false information travels compared to the actual facts. And we know that memes and fake pictures of things are playing a more and more important role in what people see, hear, and message. So throwing across to any of the panelists, how would you respond to stories on social media, including AI-generated content? Which of the panelists would like to go first?
I'll go first. I'll talk about the Streisand effect. Now, that is a thing where Barbara Streisand's next door neighbor managed to catch her house as part of a video that he was doing, being put up online for some reason. And it had 6 hits in a month. Barbara Streisand tried to sue him, got 6 million hits in a day. Now, doing nothing sounds like a terrible thing to do, but actually it probably isn't such a bad idea for the government, for instance.
Yep. There's a question from Laura, which I'll come back to. I just want to throw to the other panelists about this messaging and responding to social media and AI-generated content. Shana, would you like to share some experience and thoughts, please?
Yeah, I think this comes back again to having a really solid media communications plan if this was to happen, and ensuring that only the authorized people are actually making comments. So it might, your employees might think it's a great idea to go on social media and start responding to comments, to stories, try and think that they're actually doing good. But the more attention that these stories get, the more they're going to stay in the media. So making sure that your teams and your employees know that, if there's stories out on social media, don't be responding. It's not your call to respond. It needs to be decisions made on how and what will be told and responded to these kind of stories. But it can be a very big rabbit hole if people start responding and then it just blows out of proportion. So my recommendation, and what I've seen work for organizations previously, is just having very limited responses, not going into a lot of detail, and ensuring that employees aren't trying to just jump on the bandwagon thinking they're doing the right thing.
Before we go to the comments in the chat, Soren, if there's a tendency for me to talk with my friends about what's happening, what guidance have you provided to companies, agencies, boards, and executive around people at my level sort of just talking about it with families and friends?
So this is one of the hardest things to actually handle and to do, because you're managing a whole bunch of stories that are out of control that you can't exercise influence on. So the first thing that I tell them is to establish a single source of truth and then to point everything at it. What do I mean by a single source of truth? A page, an incident page on their own website, a page on a social media website, whatever it is that's company controlled, and where the company actually, or the organization, puts accurate information, and then every time somebody asks a question, you point back to that. Okay, so you have a frame of reference, if you like, for truth. This is what's actually happening, and you can't be caught out saying anything that's inaccurate on there. So therefore, you have to outrun the story, but you can't outrun it, so you're anchoring it using this sort of a mechanism. Second thing is, I tell them to resist the urge to fight fire with fire. You can't fight everything. You can't change everybody's mind. All you can do is establish this anchor, this, if you like, this position, and then just point to it. But we got to remember that AI changes things, and just the discussions between friends and family, there's volume, and that is impossible to deal with. There's credibility, which is an issue, and the third issue there becomes targeting. So by having a common sort of mechanism to communicate with the market in a timely manner on a regular basis, that puts you ahead of the game, and that needs to be thought through, prepared well in advance. You can't do that on the fly once the incident has occurred. And the final thing I tell them is never lie, never speculate, never minimize. The correction always costs more than the truth.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to go to Laura, who's got a comment in the chat. Laura, would you like to go through your question and comment, please?
Yeah, look, certainly. I don't know if I can just check comms with you, but assuming you can hear me, I just wanted to understand the role that the major insurers play here when they are underwriting cyber incidents. Surely they, and perhaps the panelists had experience here, surely they require an organisation to respond in a certain way in order to keep the validity of their insurance. Over.
Okay, thank you for that one, Laura. Just to reflect back, whether you're a government agency, a corporate, that sort of thing, you have cyber insurance, and there would be terms and conditions in the cyber insurance about what you need to do to prepare and to respond and how you would manage aspects of your communication. Which of the panelists would like to pick that one up, please?
I can grab this because I do a fair bit of work with insurance companies and legal companies. So definitely, if you have a breach and you have insurance, the first thing that you are required to do is actually contact your insurance company, and they will tend to put you in contact with their preferred, incident response, you could say broker. So it will be a legal firm that they have a relationship with. You might be able to choose between a couple of legal firms, but they will want you to go through that particular legal firm. And then, as Paul has asked in the chat as well, then the organisation and that incident and the communications will then be held under legal privilege for the intent of that investigation. So the insurance companies then rely on these legal firms to bring in the experts that are required to complete that investigation and how that investigation needs to roll out and what kind of information needs to be collected. So the legal firm may bring in communication specialists, digital forensics, incident response professionals, professionals to do recovery is very common for ransomware as well. So the cyber insurance will cover these responses as long as they're done within the mechanisms of the way that they have set out in their framework. So you can't go out and choose your own incident response provider, for example. It would need to go through their process, but they do support that. And then if you follow all of those, that's when they get all the information they need, and you are in a better position to recover.
Thank you, Shana. Laura, does that answer your question and make you feel more confident about things?
Look, yeah, thank you. That was a great response.
Thank you. And Paul, would you like to quickly run through your question or comment?
Shana covered that beautifully. It was very much a case of, what protection is gained. And obviously with the cyber insurance side, that certainly addresses why. Yep. Our final question is obviously who needs to be involved, and we've had quite a bit of conversation around that. So we'll move on to the next part. Technology advises that the data are still present in current applications with only copies of the data taken. Remember when we started this session, we talked about they could just steal the data, they could just take a copy, they could leave your data behind, they could deny you access to your data like a simple encryption or whatever it is. So in this scenario, what we've discovered is that the data is still present in the current applications, and cyber criminals have only taken copies of the data. Tom, would you allow critical business operations to carry on in the current environment as it is, or what would you do?
Personally, I'd worry that the organisation has got access to keys to decrypt it so they can continue operations. How much would they trust it from now on? Different issue. I think a lot depends very much on what the organisation is prepared to wear in terms of feedback from the customers. And for an organisation such as ours, where are you going to go? Because the government is there. There is. They're trusted. But at the same time, you've got a problem where organisations which are looking at it from a civil perspective got to worry about whether they're still going to be there in the morning. And that violates the tenet of economics, which says that you should spend maximum 37% on cybersecurity. Now, if the organisation is going to die, well, actually, do you want to pay the ransom or don't you? I think that depends very much on whether it's encrypted.
Platos and Soren, would you like to comment on what we've just talked about and extend it in that who would make this decision to say, even though our systems were being breached, we still need to deliver critical services, let's keep going? And what are the sorts of things that they would need to make that decision?
To me, the bigger question is whether the penetrators are still inside the environment or not. If you can't answer no to this question, it is a very big question mark whether you should continue operation or not. The other question that needs to be answered, and it is a very difficult question to answer, was any data modified in your environment? Because this may have very expensive consequences. So before we make a decision about continuation of critical operation or critical services, we need to get answers to these two questions. If we can't answer to these questions, it will be like tossing a coin by the CEO, and it's not a good situation. I'm seeing Shana's body language looks like she's agreeing with me.
I think, Vladas, we all agree with you. Those are the two key questions. And the interesting thing is containment comes into it. So if you're unsure of containment, if you think the perpetrators are still inside and data may have been modified because you can't validate it, you cannot continue to operate critical services. But there is a problem here with critical services. Are we talking about any life dependency type critical services where somebody's going to die if the service is not delivered? And that becomes an even more challenging situation because telecommunications companies, utilities companies, they deliver these kinds of critical services with people who live in their own homes on some sort of life critical machine. And then the other bit that I come back to always, the only way that I could see, and even then it's questionable, and I know you're going to say it's questionable, is if we could switch over to an untainted disaster recovery type environment, so switch over completely from the compromised systems, and in most cases that's not possible.
Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll move on. We'll extend the scenario to a couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. Kelsey, we're still doing good for time. So in that scenario, AIkitties.ai have claimed responsibility for theft and have now demanded a ransom. They've posted all over social media how easy it was to get in, and they've defaced websites and things like that to prove the point. Technology and operations is still determining answers around extent, cause, reliability of systems and services, which ties back exactly to the points that Vlados and Sorin were just making. With this government agency, some high-profile talking heads have started to comment and speculate that budgets were cut and government didn't spend enough money on cyber security. And some related independent agencies are having to undertake their own analysis to make sure that they're not exposed and to cover their dependencies on information sharing between agencies. So with that in mind, what business areas you would now expect to be involved and in what roles and at what levels? Sorin, would you like to start the conversation, please?
Certainly. Look, I have an analogy where I look at AI as both the arsonist and the fire brigade at the same time. And that's meant to make you smile. Look, the reality is that AI is a great tool for attack, but it's also a great tool for triaging thousands of customer queries, drafting personalized notifications at scale, if that is possible, anomaly detection to establish the breach scope faster than any human team. So, and it can also be used, as I said, for response. But none of this can happen if there is not the preparation and the forward looking. And that's where we have an issue. The preparation often is just not there. And it also requires the right cultural mindset from the organization that's being breached, which is to be risk-based rather than compliance-based. And too many organizations are still compliance-based, where they tick the box and I've gone through a checklist and everything is fine. Well, actually, no, it's not, because you don't really understand your risk profile and you don't know your risk appetite. So I would expect ICT services to be prepared and to have policies and procedures in place for this. I would expect them to have trained algorithms so that they can jump into action almost immediately with some of the things that I've mentioned.
Thank you. Tom, let's throw to you and let's take the second one. What 3 things would you now expect from IT services and operations so that you can sustain your business?
Well, I think probably the first thing is to make sure that you've got a continuity of people. So if you've got an IT supplier, but they've got sufficient depth. Now, if that means their HR department, they're putting out contracts with people, that's probably not a great look. But how we go beyond that and keep it rolling for a couple of days, don't know. Generally speaking, going to find out about stuff like this because somebody from the public is going to mention it to somebody else. So our services are dependent on having enough people inside who are properly trained. Once you've got enough people to sustain something for a few days, you've got to decide whether your service is actually going to be responding to media pressure, in other words, responding to the market, or whether you're going to be doing something that's productive. And that depends very much on the sophistication level of the board. But doing the right thing in inverted commas is a dependent task, because it depends very much on what your perception of right is. And the third thing is that restoring systems probably means proving that they're fit for purpose. That's something you can't really say for sure, because unless you've got a transaction log, you can't say that somebody is successful or unsuccessfully made a change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Conscious of time, we'll carry on for 5 minutes and then we'll quickly wrap up, and we won't worry too much about the rest of the slides in the deck because this conversation's been really good. Shana, what 3 ways could you use AI to help you engaging customers? And I know Soren sort of mentioned it, but given what we know and what we've discovered and that sort of thing, you're talking with managers and execs. What 3 ways could you use AI to help?
I think you need to be very careful when communicating with people with AI in these instances, again, because of that trust. Where I would be using AI particularly useful is getting, what is the summary of what's happening? Often from your ICT teams, you're going to have, a huge list of timelines and different systems that are involved. But what you need to be able to bring down is, well, what are the key things that I need to tell my customers right now at this point in time, and potentially using AI to pull that data in. I've done I haven't done a lot, but I've done some writing courses where using AI to do writing assistance, you need to make sure that your AI is particularly well set up too, so that it gets your voice and your tone and what you need to communicate. But I would be careful about using AI with engaging with customers, purely unless you have it worked out so that it doesn't sound like you're just sending straight from AI, because then you'll lose trust again. But I find that AI is very good helping with summarization and also making complex concepts into something that is a little bit more palatable for people who don't understand the technology behind it.
Right.
That's it.
Vlados, one last comment from you, and then we'll wrap up and move on.
I concur with Shanna, and I probably would be even more careful with AI than Shanna suggests, because there are known cases when information that has been fed into AI systems suddenly has become available to third parties, and this is a disaster. Definitely, I would more rely on my comms team rather than on AI, because comms team know how to do this. That's their bread and butter. If there are two types of AI. If it is your own AI that is kind of on the prem or in your own cloud, you may use it. But if it is a generic AI that sits in somebody else's cloud, I probably wouldn't use it at all. So that's probably my 2 cents on this.
Thank you very much indeed. Everybody, please put some questions in the chat for the panelists. Panelists, can I thank you very much indeed for your time and your participation. If you could stay on for the next 4 or 5 minutes while we wrap up, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so what can we do? How can we have an impact with all of this? We've talked about the robustness of the backup regime. We've talked about being able to assess the vulnerabilities and work with them. We talked about critical data sets and whether or not we would be able to use them given what we discovered in this scenario. Of course, working with our stakeholders, and one of the ones we haven't really delved into because you ran out of time is vendors, the alignment of vendors for provision of services and the contracts and those sort of things, especially where agencies have vendors providing services and operations. So some of the things we can do is we can do sessions like this within our organizations. We can do the scenario exercises, and we can promote the cyber awareness and this whole of business response that's been needed. Now, one other action is working with HR. In terms of when you hire people into the business, whether they're in technical roles, administrative roles, financial roles, audit roles, and working with them to make sure that the right performance metrics, the skills, the expertise, the business understanding of cyber and the impacts carry across into the hiring processes and the ongoing skilling and development. One of the other areas we can action is the business prerequisites that go with it. One of the themes from the conversation repeatedly has been this whole of business response, having the preparations in place, having the people knowing what to do. All of that is obviously support networks, mentoring, resourcing, skilling, training, vendor management, being able to respond to customers, project management, and those sort of things. So in certain instances, we may need to build up some of the prerequisite business capacities and capabilities to be able to deliver our responses to cyber attacks and that sort of thing. As a business or as a government agency, we benefit from having skilled people through having resources that are able to do multiple things. So there's wider business returns as well as responding to cybersecurity, but our cybersecurity response does have a dependency upon these business prerequisites. And we've been going for nearly 80 minutes, so we're probably getting a bit stiff and we should probably start to wrap up. So in the last 5 minutes, please put your questions into the chat and our panelists can answer them. And just to go around the panelists, one last thought for today. Shana, would you like to lead with thought of the day?
Oh, I have so many thoughts of the day. Well, can you come back to me?
Not a problem. Tom, would you like to lead thought of the day?
Thought of the day, assume breach.
Sorry?
I think you said assume
Sorry.
breach.
Oh, assume breach, yep. Vlados, thought for the day, please.
Be prepared for the breach.
Yep. And Shana?
Right, I remembered because I can be on my high horse here. I did a similar thing last Friday at the AWSN symposium, and one of the questions or slides that I put out there is, you know, when you're flying on an aircraft, the air crew, they do safety training on every single type of plane they fly at least once a year. Pilots are doing that at least twice a year. We feel safe because we know that the people that have our safety are actually trained, and if an incident does happen, they don't have to think, they know what they're doing. And that's the kind of attitude we need to take when we're in cybersecurity teams, is we do sometimes have, you know, the safety of people, especially for critical infrastructure, in our hands. So we want to be practicing this. We want to make sure that if this happens, as an organisation, we can respond and we'll have resilience.
Paul says muscle memory.
Yeah.
That's the one. And is there any other last minute comments or questions?
I would say, look, focus on the risk profile, because if you're just doing compliance and ticking the box, you're going to miss the key risks.
Thank you. Once again, I'd love to thank our panelists for your time, your contribution, and sharing your expertise. Thank you for participants for asking such great questions. Kelsey, I'm going to throw back to you for final wrap up. I'll stay around for 5 or 10 minutes if anybody has any further questions. Panelists, thank you very much indeed. It was a great conversation. Hopefully everybody's gained a lot from it. Kelsey, back to you.